Hey everyone, and welcome back to Motivation Library. There's this age-old question that's always fascinated me. Why are some nations so wealthy? While others, well, they just seem to struggle.
It's a question that's really puzzled, some of history's brightest minds.
And today, we're diving deep, really deep, into a book that tackles this very question. We're talking about Why Nations Fail by Daron Acemoglu and James A. Robinson. I'm Steve Cole.
And I'm Sophia Blake.
Glad to have you with us as always.
It's great to be here.
So, when you think about this question, like why some nations are rich and some are poor, you'd think geography would play a huge role,
Yes.
right? Like, oh, they've got all the natural resources or the perfect climate.
Right. It seems like the obvious answer.
But Acemoglu and Robinson, they actually argue, they make a very compelling case, that it's not about where a country's located.
Exactly. And they use this fascinating example, really fascinating, of Nogales.
Nogales.
Yeah, it's a city that's literally split in half by the U.S.-Mexico border.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see where you're going with this.
On the U.S. side, you have Nogales, Arizona. It's thriving. But just across the line, in Nogales, Sonora,
Yeah.
widespread poverty.
Same people, same geography. So what's the difference?
Well, that's precisely the point the authors are making. They argue that the key difference boils down to, well, institutions.
Institutions, huh?
Yeah.
So, are we talking about schools and universities? Government buildings?
Not quite, no. When they say institutions, they mean the rules of the game, so to speak. The laws, the norms, the practices, all those things that kind of shape how people interact and behave in a society.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So it's not the physical buildings, but the framework, the underlying system.
You got it. Think of institutions as the operating system of a nation, if you will.
Interesting.
They determine who holds power, how resources are allocated, what opportunities are available to people.
Okay, now that makes a lot of sense. So how does this play out in our Nogales example?
Well, on the U.S. side, you've got institutions that strongly protect property rights, they enforce contracts fairly, and they really encourage entrepreneurship.
Gotcha.
This, in turn, creates an environment where people feel secure, investing, innovating, taking risks. They know that the system, well, has their back,
Makes sense.
But on the Mexican side, these same institutions are often, well, they're weaker or sometimes just absent altogether.
Oh, I see.
And this leads to, well, less investment and ultimately less economic growth.
Wow, so it really is all about the rules of the game, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not the people, not the land, but the system.
Exactly.
And the authors, to really drive this point home, they take us on this wild ride through history to illustrate how this plays out, not just in Nogales, but all over the globe.
They start by going way, way back to the Spanish conquest of the Americas.
Ah, yes, conquistadors. Gold, it's a classic tale.
And a crucial period because it really highlights how different types of institutions took root in different parts of the Americas.
Okay, I'm all ears. So what happened when the Spanish arrived? I mean, it wasn't exactly a friendly visit, was it?
No, not exactly. In places like, well, Mexico, Peru, they established what the authors call, and it's a really striking term, extractive institutions.
Extractive, like sucking the resources out.
You got it. Designed to extract resources and wealth, primarily for the benefit of a small, very elite group.
So we're talking forced labor, unfair taxes, monopolies controlling all the key industries.
You got it. It was a system built on exploitation. The Spanish crown, in this model, they were incentivized to keep the indigenous population powerless.
So they could just keep taking their stuff.
Exactly.
It's a pretty ruthless strategy when you think about it.
It is.
But hey, I guess when you're sailing halfway across the world, you're probably not going there to promote equality and justice, right? You're there for the gold.
Well, that's certainly how it played out. But up north, things were a bit different.
Up north, you mean, in the North American colonies?
Yes, particularly the northern colonies. The English settlers, for various reasons, they weren't able to establish the same kind of, brutal extractive system.
Why not?
Well, for one, there weren't these massive, readily available riches just waiting to be plundered.
No mountains of gold lying around.
Not quite. Plus, the indigenous populations they encountered were organized differently.
Yeah.
They faced more resistance, let's just say.
So what did they do? Did the English just say, okay, well, let's be nice and build a fair society instead? I mean, they still wanted to profit, right?
Of course. They were still driven by profit. But the circumstances, the situation on the ground, it kind of pushed them towards a slightly more inclusive model.
Slightly.
Well, it was still far from perfect, mind you.
Okay. Okay.
But they needed to attract settlers, encourage them to work the land, build businesses.
They needed buy-in.
Right.
Mm.
So this led to institutions that emphasize things like individual initiative, property rights, and even a broader, though still limited, participation in politics.
So two very different paths right from the get-go.
Two paths that set these regions on wildly different trajectories.
And the authors are arguing that these early institutional choices, they had this ripple effect,
Oh, absolutely.
shaping the destinies of these nations for centuries to come.
It's like, imagine setting a ship on a specific course.
Yeah.
That initial direction, even with all the storms and adjustments along the way, it's going to have a huge impact on where you end up.
So even before we get to the Industrial Revolution, we're already seeing these huge institutional differences in place.
Precisely. Which brings up another intriguing question, doesn't it? Why did the Industrial Revolution kick off in England, of all places?
Right. I mean, other parts of Europe or even the world, they were just as advanced in a lot of ways.
So why England?
It's like they suddenly leaped ahead of everyone else.
What was in their secret sauce?
And that's where the authors point to, and this is fascinating to me as a bit of a history buff, the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Talk about a turning point. It really shifted the balance of power in England.
And why was that shift so important?
Well, before the Glorious Revolution, the king, he could basically just hand out monopolies to whoever he pleased.
Stifling competition and innovation.
Exactly. But after the Glorious Revolution, well, the rules of the game started to change, didn't they?
The playing field, it became much more level. Suddenly, if you had a good idea, a willingness to take risks, you had a real shot at success.
It didn't matter who your daddy was.
Exactly. And that's where you see figures like, well, James Watt with his groundbreaking steam engine.
Or Richard Arkwright with his revolutionary spinning frame.
These weren't just inventors. They were entrepreneurs who thrived in this new environment of, well, greater economic freedom and much more secure property rights. And their ingenuity, it literally fueled the Industrial Revolution.
So it's like England stumbled into this institutional advantage, almost by accident, that then catapulted them ahead of everyone else.
It's a fascinating example of how these, seemingly abstract, dry ideas about institutions can have real, tangible consequences in the world.
Absolutely. It really makes you think about how the rules of the game can either unleash a nation's potential or, well, hold it back.
It's all about creating the right conditions for people to thrive.
Okay, so we've got these institutional differences playing out across history.
Yeah.
But what about the countries that have been stuck with those extractive institutions, for centuries?
Right.
Can they break free from that cycle?
Well, that's what we'll be exploring next. Acemoglu and Robinson, they introduced this really compelling concept called, wait for it, critical junctures.
Critical junctures. I like the sound of that.
These are specific moments in history when crises, or sometimes even opportunities, can create openings for institutional change.
Okay, so like forks in the road for a nation's development.
Exactly.
Can't wait to hear more about that.
So these critical junctures, think of them like forks in the road for a nation,
Yeah, okay, I'm with you.
And the authors, they actually use some really dramatic historical examples to kind of illustrate this whole idea.
I love a good history lesson. Lay it on me. What kind of event, would qualify as a critical juncture? Give us an example.
How about a plague? One that wipes out like a third of Europe's population.
Oh, wow. You're talking about the Black Death.
The one and only, the
Right.
14th century.
Yeah, that's got to be a critical juncture, right? I mean, talk about a game changer. But how did that create an opening for institutional change?
Well, think about it. You have this massive loss of life, right?
Yeah.
Leads to huge labor shortages,
Okay.
which in turn, well, it empowers the peasantry.
The peasants.
Suddenly, the lords, they need the peasants more than the peasants need them.
Interesting.
The power dynamics shift, you see. And this significantly weakens the grip of the feudal system, especially in Western Europe.
It's like the plague, it accidentally created the conditions for greater equality?
Well, accidentally might be one way to put it. But the point is, this crisis, it opened up a window of opportunity. And in England, well, this critical juncture, along with a bunch of other factors, it helps set the stage for more inclusive institutions down the line.
But critical junctures, I mean, they don't automatically guarantee positive change, do they?
No, they don't. It's not a guarantee. They present a choice.
A choice.
Societies can double down, stick with what they know, even if it's not working, even if it's dysfunctional.
Right.
Or they can seize the moment, shift to something new. Take Japan, for example.
Japan.
The Meiji Restoration, 19th century.
Ah, yes. The Meiji Restoration. I mean, Japan went from feudal society to, like, a modern industrial powerhouse almost overnight, right? Talking about a critical juncture paying off.
It is a remarkable story. I mean, you've got Commodore Perry and his American warships just showing up in 1853, demanding that Japan open its ports to trade. It created this major crisis. The Japanese elite, they realized pretty quickly that they couldn't just cling to those isolationist policies anymore.
They had to adapt.
They faced a critical juncture: adapt or be swallowed whole by the Western powers.
So they chose to modernize, to industrialize, and it worked.
Brilliantly.
In just a few decades, they totally transformed their society, their economy.
Amazing.
But, there are other examples. Societies facing those similar pressures, they choose the opposite path: resistance.
Like who?
The Ottoman Empire. They faced pressure from Europe, but they clung hard to those extractive institutions.
And, well, we know how that story ends. The sick man of Europe eventually just collapses.
It does. It's a cautionary tale, really. Critical junctures, they're opportunities, but they're not guarantees. Whether society sees them, use them for positive change, it depends. It depends on the choices made by those in power. The broader social context, it's complicated.
Sounds like leadership plays a huge role here. You need leaders with vision, right?
Vision to see that change is needed, and courage, real courage to push for it, even when it's not popular.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Right.
And sometimes that leadership, well, it comes from unexpected places.
Oh.
Botswana.
Landlocked
country in southern Africa after independence. One of the poorest countries in the world.
But then didn't Botswana pull off like a miracle?
They did. They'd inherited these relatively inclusive institutions from their pre-colonial history. And their leaders, people like Seretse Khama, they made some really wise choices that reinforced those institutions.
Like what did they do?
Invested heavily, like really heavily, in education, healthcare, infrastructure, promoted good governance, transparency.
Smart moves.
And crucially, they use the revenue from, diamond mining to benefit everyone, not just a select few.
Wow. So they had this valuable resource, but they didn't let it become a curse like it has in so many other countries.
Yeah.
They actually used it to build a better future for all.
It's a testament, really a testament, to the power of good leadership, sound institutional choices.
Botswana, what an example.
It makes you wonder, can other countries, the ones stuck in that rut of extractive institutions, can they break free? Can they create their own critical junctures?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Are the authors optimistic? Do they think it's possible?
They're cautiously optimistic, I'd say. They argue that change is possible, absolutely. But it's not easy. It takes a combination of things: a committed leadership, a mobilized citizenry, people willing to demand change, and honestly, a bit of luck doesn't hurt.
So it's not about just waiting around for some magical external shock to come and fix everything.
No, I don't know.
It's about actively working, actively creating the conditions for positive change.
That's a great way to put it. They point to, the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of apartheid in South Africa.
Big changes.
As evidence that even those seemingly, really entrenched extractive institutions, they can be overturned.
There's hope.
There is. But they also warn about, and this is interesting, the iron law of oligarchy.
Iron law of oligarchy. Okay, that sounds a little ominous. What is that?
It's this idea that even when revolutions are successful, they overthrow dictators, often they just end up replacing one set of elites with another.
Oh, so the more things change, the more they stay the same.
In a way, yeah. The underlying extractive institutions, they remain. And that cycle, that awful cycle of poverty and inequality, it just continues.
So it's not enough to just topple the tyrant?
Not at all. You've got to change the system itself.
You got to get to the root of the problem.
The real challenge is building those lasting inclusive institutions, the ones that empower people, create a truly level playing field.
Where everyone has a chance.
Right. And this brings us to a really fascinating and honestly a bit perplexing case.
What's that? China. Yeah, I mean, their economic growth over the past few decades, it's been absolutely mind-blowing. They've lifted millions out of poverty.
It's been incredible.
But they've done it, haven't they? Under authoritarian rule, they haven't exactly embraced democracy or fully developed what the authors would call inclusive institutions.
Right.
So is China the exception that proves the rule?
That's the question. Can a nation really achieve sustained prosperity without political freedom?
Big questions.
The authors, they argue that China's growth, it's likely to hit a ceiling eventually.
Why?
Because their extractive political institutions, they stifle innovation, create this environment of uncertainty.
Okay, so they're saying that while China might be able to keep riding this wave of state-directed investment, technology adoption for a while longer.
They're going to need to unleash the creative potential of their people if they want to become a truly innovative powerhouse.
And for that, you need greater economic and political freedom.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's a really compelling argument.
Time will tell, I guess, if they're right.
Time will tell. But this example, it really forces us to grapple with this complex relationship
Between economic development and political freedom.
It's not always a straightforward answer,
It's a reminder that there are no easy answers.
No one-size-fits-all solutions. Every nation, it's got its own unique history, challenges, opportunities.
But why nations fail, it gives us a powerful framework.
For understanding the root causes of global inequality.
It shifts the focus away from those superficial explanations, like geography or culture, and it makes us look at the institutions.
The institutions that are shaping a nation's destiny.
Right.
And for me, one of the most powerful takeaways, institutions, they're not set in stone.
They can change.
They can. They're created by humans. They can be changed by humans.
We're not just passive passengers on this ship.
Not at all.
We have agency. We can influence the course of our nations, even if it's just in small ways.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the question of what this all means for us, the listeners.
Yeah, how do we connect these grand historical narratives to our own lives?
Yeah, it's easy to get, kind of lost in the big picture, right? We're talking about massive historical trends, revolutions, empires rising and falling. It's a lot to take in.
It can feel a bit overwhelming, that's for sure.
But one of the things I really appreciate about Why Nations Fail is that it encourages us, the reader, to think critically about the institutions that are shaping our own societies, like right here, right now, not just way back when.
It's so easy, isn't it, to just take things for granted, to think, well, this is just how things are. But this book, it reminds us that institutions, they're not fixed.
They're not like laws of nature.
Right. They were created by humans, and they can be changed by humans. So it's not about, feeling powerless or just accepting our fate. It's about asking ourselves, are the institutions in our own communities, in our cities, our countries, are they really promoting, inclusivity, opportunity, prosperity for everyone, or are they rigged to just benefit a select few? Are they holding people back?
And if we see problems, right, if we see injustice, inequality, we can't just, shrug our shoulders and say, well, that's just how the world works. We have a responsibility, I think, to be active citizens, to try to shape our institutions for the better.
It's about recognizing that we're not just passive bystanders. We have agency. We can make a difference.
And even small actions, they can have a ripple effect. It's like that butterfly effect you always hear about.
Yeah. A tiny flutter of wings and then boom, hurricane on the other side of the world.
A small change here can lead to big changes somewhere else.
I love that analogy. And it makes you realize that our choices, our actions, even the ones that seem insignificant, well, they can have consequences that go way beyond what we can even imagine.
Absolutely. And that's true for institutions as well. Those small acts of courage, those small steps towards greater inclusivity, fairness, they can have, a really profound impact over time.
It makes you think about all those unsung heroes throughout history. Right?
Yeah.
All those people who challenged the status quo, who spoke truth to power, who fought for a better world, one small step at a time.
It's inspiring, isn't it? Think about Rosa Parks. Refusing to give up her seat on that bus in Montgomery. It seems like such a small act, but it sparked a movement. It helped dismantle segregation in the U.S., and it all started because one person said, no, this is not right.
Wow, it's powerful stuff. It shows that we all have the power to be change makers. in our own way.
And that's really the ultimate message of why nations fail, I think. It's not just about, understanding why some countries succeed and others struggle. It's about understanding that we have the power to shape our collective destiny. Building a more just and prosperous world, it's not just a dream, it's a real possibility. But it requires us to be active participants, not just, passive observers.
Well said. Couldn't agree more. So folks, if you're looking for a book that will really challenge your assumptions, that will make you see the world in a new light and leave you feeling, empowered to make a difference, then Why Nations Fail is a must-read.
It's a deep dive into history, economics, politics, but it's a call to action.
A call to build a better future, one institution, one community, one act of courage at a time.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into why nations fail on Motivation Library.
It's always a pleasure exploring these big ideas with you. Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us next time for another fascinating journey into the world of ideas. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving to make the world a better place.